I didn't realize it was like a buffet here. So I can't put everything. But anyway, guys, just for those of you who were a bit late, Pastor Rudy and Pastor Man are actually opening a church. Like they're preaching there at court. That's why we got privileged to serve you guys this morning. But we have Pastor One reading the word.
Hey everyone. Okay. There is something in all of us that that makes us really love to go for the underdog. I mean, who loves to go for the underdog when you're looking at a underdog versus champion type of match? We love it when a person or a team who isn't supposed to win wins big. When the little guy beats the big guy, when the unknown and the smaller team beats the champion team that everybody says will win. And so I was, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about, because I'm not really into sports, so really the good illustration here would be a sporting illustration, but I couldn't think of anything. So I was thinking of some movies, and I think the underdog theme really is very prominent in even the movies that we watch. And just off the top of my head the other day, I was listing off movies like, Rocky, Karate Kid, and I think we have a slide for it, Cool Runnings, Jerry Maguire, Remember the Titans, Forrest Gump, Cinderella, Oliver Twist, My Fair Lady. You can probably tell my age by the movies that I've just listed off just now. But the most famous of all underdog stories is perhaps when the shepherd boy David challenged mighty Goliath. Have you ever been in an uneven battle like that? Overmatched, under-equipped against some Goliath in your life? And all of us, we all face giants, whether they're powerful opponents, they're intimidating problems. Giants are upsetting until we see, just like David did, that we see our Goliath from God's point of view. And I'm going to be reading from parts of chapter 17 in 1 Samuel. The story here is very familiar to us. But sometimes when we're familiar with something, we tend to miss some of the detail. So we need to look at it again with fresh eyes. And so that's what we're going to do. And we're going to start from verse 4. When Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel, he was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail, as chainmail, weighed 125 pounds. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him. So his armor bearer walked ahead of him, carrying a shield. Verse 22. David left his things with the keeper of supplies and hurried out to the ranks to greet his brothers. And he was talking to them. Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out from the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. And as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Verse 32. Don't worry about this Philistine, David told King Saul. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There is no way that you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. Verse 40, he picked up 5 stones, smooth stones, from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed with only a shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Verses 43 to 44. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Verse 47. It was getting a bit violent there. "And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us." Verse 50. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from his sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. Now, we all love an underdog story. We love an underdog story so long as we're not the underdog, right? So long as we're not the underdog. So when we're the ones outnumbered, when we're the ones outplayed, outwitted, we begin to feel scared. We begin to feel intimidated and even entertain thoughts of defeat even before we've entered into the fight. And I believe that God has preserved this story in the Bible, which is one of the greatest examples of an epic event of mismatched enemies that no one expected. No one would have picked David over Goliath. Nobody would have picked David over Goliath. But before we continue, I'm going to look at 1 Samuel 16:7. And these are the words that the Lord gives Samuel. So Samuel, at this point, he's looking for the next king. So Saul is king at the moment, but he is looking for the next king. And he's in the home of Jesse, and Jesse is parading his sons in front of Samuel. And Samuel he's really impressed with Eliab, who apparently is the tallest among the 8 brothers. But the Lord says, "Don't be impressed with his height." And then he says in verse 7, "But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him." Look at this. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. The Lord doesn't see the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. If you remember anything from today, remember that. And that's the principle that holds true throughout life, throughout time. We're often impressed with, we're sometimes intimidated about, we're overwhelmed with others who, outrank us, outmaneuver us, outthink us, outsmart us. And we forget that God doesn't judge people by the outward appearance, but by the truth of their life and the condition of their hearts. That's why he chose David, who Jesse, his own father, Jesse, had overlooked him. Samuel had to actually ask David's father if those were all his sons. And Jesse's like, "Oh, you know what? I actually do have one more son. He's out in the field." It's like, "David, hoo-wee!" And so David comes running in. And the Lord says to Samuel, "This is the one. Anoint him." And I'm sure that David's older brothers, because just like you and me, they also judged by outward appearance, they were probably immediately jealous. Before David knew it, the oil is running down the back of his neck as he's anointed as the king-elect. Because the Lord looks at the heart. Because he knew that David had what it takes. Now we come to the giant. So a little time had passed already since this anointing. And David is back in the field. He's with the sheep. He's watching over the sheep and the goats. And this valley of Elah is now a place of conflict. It's a place of battle. And here we find a lot of contrasts. Here we find, King Saul, who is the commander of the Israelite army, he's scared to death. He's scared to death over Goliath. You know, we read that Goliath's height is 9 feet 9 inches tall. That's just 3 inches shorter than the height of a basketball rim, which is 10 feet. That's tall. That's big. You know, and he wears armor that weighs 60 kilos. The coat of chainmail from his shoulders to his knees is what we read. A javelin's in his hand, and the javelin, the spearhead alone on the javelin was 10 kilos. And a shield bearer, so see that extra person, that smaller person? The shield bearer went before him. So he was an intimidating, towering presence. So you'll see the contrast in the verses 24 that says, as soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. Now, why would they do that? Why would they run away in fright? Because they judge by outward appearance. So they say to David, who's come to visit his brothers at the battle site for the day, have you seen this giant? You know, he comes out every day to defy Israel. As an aside, the tallest one in the Israelite army is King Saul. You know, Saul, the Bible said, stood head and shoulders above everyone. But he's now leading his army into retreat. He's backing out because they're scared. So Saul's in the tent. You know, his knees are knocking. He's afraid. He's with his troops. They're scared of Goliath, who is only one man. So look at the response in verse 32. Don't worry about the Philistine. David's told Saul, but Saul, I'll go fight him. Now, some of us could probably say, you know what? We're talking about a teenager. This is teenage foolishness. You know, this is arrogance on the part of David. And by the way, this is not a miracle story. I think when we've read this, a lot of us think that this is a miracle story. It's not. What happened between David and Goliath is not a miracle. It'll all make sense when we actually study it. Some of you, that might be like, ooh, okay, what you talking about? I'm telling you now, this story, what happened between David and Goliath is not a miracle. It actually makes sense that David wouldn't be intimidated. So he goes, you know, I'll go fight this uncircumcised Philistine who, you know, has the audacity to defy the armies of the living God. You know, that's my nation. That's my country. And so verse 33, as we read, you know, King Saul is saying, don't be ridiculous, David. No one can fight this Philistine and possibly win, and not you. Why does Saul say that? Again, because he's looking at the outward appearance. Says, you're just a boy. You know, you're just a boy, David. You know, again, looking at the outward appearance. David's still a teenager at this stage. And he's saying, Goliath, you know, Goliath's been a man of war since his youth. You're dealing with a beast here. So, you know, just settle down, David. But what happens? David doesn't want to settle down. He doesn't. And in verses 34 and 37, he says, but David persisted. And he says, here's why. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, you know, he says, I fought against them. You know, I go after it with a club and I rescue the lamb from its mouth. You've got to be pretty close to the wild animal to rescue a lamb from its mouth. You know, if the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death. Sorry, a little violent. But I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it again to this pagan Philistine too. For he has defied the armies of the living God. And the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. So David is not intimidated. You know, he's learned how to see and perceive when the odds are against him. And I need to give you a bit of extra context for this story, and I need to explain ancient day warfare to you and remind you that even if we're underdogs, if we have a memory and our theology is right, it's straight, we're well equipped. We're well equipped to stand up against the giants. It's all we need. Our memory will remind us of all the great things God has done and how he's proven to be strong, which means he can do it again. And the theology reminds us that the battle is his. So David didn't go into the battle thinking of himself as bigger than the giant, because he's not bigger than the giant, but he was well equipped with a strength that the giant didn't have, and he fought in the name of the Lord his God. So let's just remove the word from miracle from your minds when we think about this story, because there is nothing really miraculous about what David did or what happened in the Battle of Elah. So in ancient warfare, there were 3 types of warriors. The first type, and I have a photo, is the cavalry. So these are basically soldiers on horses, anything that was done with a horse. Either the warrior is riding the horse or the warrior is riding a chariot pulled by horses. So that's the first type of soldier. The second type of warrior in the ancient times was the infantry. So infantry was a foot soldier. They were heavily armed. They were equipped with weapons. They were equipped with swords, clubs, knives, and they were built really for, they fought really in hand-to-hand combat. They fought up close with their enemies. So the infantry also carried their own shields because they fought up close. So the shield was part of their defense. They'd have their shield in one hand and then their weapon in another. And that's what Goliath was. He was part of the infantry. The third kind of warrior would be what we call the artillery. So that's our word for it. But in those days, they were the projectile warriors. So they were the archers and they were the slingers. Let's talk about first the archers, which is on your left-hand side. So the archers. The archers needed to have a shield bearer to travel with them. So they traveled with somebody who had a shield in front of them, because the archer needed 2 hands to use the weapons. So their weapon was obviously the bow and arrow, and they needed both hands to do that. So they traveled with somebody who carried a shield to protect them. The slingers, which is on the right-hand side, this is what David was. The slingers were like the snipers. They're the modern-day snipers. They traveled light. They wore no armor. They carried no weapons except for this little leather pouch or a rope pouch with strands on each side that would be where they placed the rock. Now, slingers could hit their target up to 180 meters away, which is about the length of 2 football fields. Oh, yes. It's a long way. They were such a deadly group to fight that the Romans even had special tongs for the infantry soldiers, so the foot soldiers, to carry, so that they could remove the stones which had been embedded into their fellow soldiers by slingers who were, swinging these rocks from a distance. So the rock and the sling were a devastating weapon. If you're wondering about the power of this, I actually found a video online and it talks about some other ancient warriors, but it shows you the power of the sling. We'll play that just now. It's a short video.
Gunfire would not have been enough to tip the balance in favor of the Spaniards, because the Indians had a deadly countermeasure. The sling.
Clearly lethal if you're unarmored.
Yeah, in the face, break the cheekbone, put him out of commission.
In a battle, there would have been thousands of these. So I think, all in all, excellent weapon.
The Aztecs used uniformly rounded clay balls and stones as projectiles for the sling. These traveled at more than 240 kilometers per hour. Their consistent size and weight made them accurate and deadly.
Take a look at this. It's a very simple technology. a string sling made out of maguey fibers, several simple knots is the only construction. This replica was made in about 30 minutes, start to finish. And anyone could make this. It was a simple knot, simple technology, but you see how terribly lethal it was.
The simplicity of these weapons gave the Indians a considerable advantage. Anyone who's seen these 500-year-old weapons in action would agree.
Okay, that's it. Having looked at that, I also want to turn your attention to Judges 20, verse 16. And this is listing certain types of soldiers in Benjamin's troop. So it says, among Benjamin's elite troops, 700 were left-handed, and each of them could sling a rock and hit a target within a hair's breadth without missing. That's pretty accurate. It's interesting that they would also say, the Bible would also call out the left-handed people as well. Is anyone left-handed here? Yep, there is a few. So you got a special call out. There were 700 left-handed master slingers, you know, southpaw swingers. Yeah. All of a sudden, this fight is becoming a lot more reasonable. You can see. The average standard foot soldier is, you know, weighed down by this thick, heavy armory. But they're sitting ducks in the presence of a very accurate slinger, the snipers of the ancient day. So sitting ducks, these slingers could launch a stone from 180 meters away with deadly accuracy. So David was not intimidated. You know, he had practiced that swing for years. Eitan Hirsch is a ballistic expert with the Israeli Defense Forces, and he did a series of calculations showing that a typical size stone by an expert slinger at a distance of 35 meters would have hit Goliath's head in a little more than 1 second. Another historian writes, Goliath had about as much chance against David as a bronze-aged warrior with a sword would have had with an opponent armed with a .45 automatic pistol. So it's saying, so basically it's saying that Goliath had about as much chance against David than he would have had with somebody armed with a .45 automatic pistol. So how easy it is to be intimidated by the giant Goliath if you weren't a slinger. You know, when we say giants simply mean that the bigger they are, the harder they fall, which is what was in David's mind for sure. Goliath was a huge 9 foot 9 inches compared to David, who was, you know, a small, slender, ruddy teenager. Goliath would have been, you know, heavily armored, like I said, carrying weapons. And David had no army. And he's only carrying a sling and a shepherd's staff. Verse 40. Then he took his staff by his hand, chose 5 smooth stones. He knew what he was doing. The smooth stones are the best. From the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag. And with his sling in his hand, he approached the Philistine. Go back to King Saul. See, King Saul was an infantryman. He was a foot soldier. So one of the things that foot soldiers would do, because they're in hand-to-hand combat, is he would size up his opponents. So King Saul was thinking in terms of size. He was thinking in terms of statistics. He was thinking in terms of human power and strength. But David is a shepherd whose life is spent on the open field, living by faith, you know, dealing with predators like wolves and bears and lions. So over the years, David has relied on stealth and speed, surprise, and his sling. During my research around this ancient scene, there are a few things that I also learned about this giant. Firstly, Goliath comes into the valley with a shield bearer. So he has an extra person carrying his shield. So even though he's not an archer, he had a shield bearer. Why would an infantryman, so a foot soldier who usually carries his own shield and his weapon, why would he need an individual shield bearer? Why wouldn't he carry it himself? Why wouldn't he carry it, sword in one hand, shield in the other? Why couldn't he handle the shield on his own? Maybe the shield bearer played another role. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because he did play another role. Second, the comments of the giant were strange. Why does Goliath tell David to come to him? He says, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? You know? He goes, come here, come here. Why didn't he go to David? Why would he ask a slinger? So it's asking a sniper, pretty much, to come closer to him. It's like asking a man with a .45 caliber gun to come closer. What does it do? It just increases the accuracy, right? Unless he didn't know that David was carrying a sling. And why would he curse David and arouse the anger of a slinger, knowing that it would only increase the intensity of his attack? Unless Goliath couldn't see all that well. You stay with me. When we looked at verse 43, it says, so the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Sticks, plural. The Hebrew word here is plural. Sticks, more than one. But according to the previous verse that we read, it said David only had a shepherd's staff. Singular, one. He didn't have more than one. So why would Goliath, especially when David is coming closer, refer to the sticks in David's hand? Now, medical doctors have weighed in and they've come up with some conclusions. And many now believe that the giant actually had this very serious medical condition called acromegaly. His actions and his words look like and sound like a person who is suffering from acromegaly, which is a pathological enlargement of the bones, the hands, the feet, the face, and the head that is caused by chronic overactivity of the pituitary gland inside the base of the brain, so inside Goliath's head. One of the common side effects of this condition are tumors. And the tumors on the pituitary gland are known to cause visionary problems as they grow to the point where they compress the optic nerves, so that the people with this condition often suffer from severely restricted sight or double vision. Oh. Ripley's Believe It or Not. All right, this explains why Goliath was led into the valley with a shield bearer, because he couldn't see where he was going. He couldn't clearly make out his opponent either, which is why he asked David to come closer. See, life around him was a blur, which explains why Goliath never knew that David had a sling. It also explains why he called what was in David's hands those sticks. You see, it's easy to forget that what gave the giant his enormous size was the source of his greatest weaknesses as well. It's easy to forget what gave the giant his enormous size was also the source of his greatest weaknesses. That's why we don't go by size or statistics or power or what things seem like in the physical. That's why statistics shouldn't intimidate us when we have the right perspective. And I think that's an important lesson for each of us to learn in 2020 as we want to see God arise. Each of us need to learn this lesson. Those who battle our own giants, and we all do, each and every one of us do. They may look powerful, they may look scary in appearance, but they aren't always what they seem to be. So remember the words we read earlier. God said, I don't see like you see. I don't see like you see. You look at appearance and you're impressed. You look at someone, a well-dressed man or a woman, and you're impressed. But I don't pay attention to that. That's not my focus. He says, I look at the heart. I look at character. And with this, you can face any giant. And David had it. David saw the giant as the Lord saw him. So he ran towards that giant without any fear. He was happy with the invitation to come close. It only meant that he could hit the mark exactly on target, whereas Goliath was totally unaware of who he was fighting. He had no idea that he was coming in front of a confident, experienced, unintimidated, accurate master slinger in David. David knew exactly what he was doing. See, David's victory was not the result of a miracle. Indeed, the battle belonged to the Lord. Don't get me wrong. The battle belonged to the Lord. But David still used his gifting. He still used his experience as a master slinger, as a shepherd. And although no one could overpower Goliath in a hand-to-hand battle, his hidden weakness made him vulnerable against David's skill. Giants are not always what they seem to be. So I wonder, who's the real underdog here? Who's the real underdog here? David or Goliath? Starting to look like Goliath might be. And we may not be slingers. I mean, we're not slingers. I don't know anyone here who is a slinger. We're believers in Jesus Christ. And we've been equipped with the Spirit of God. The same Spirit of God who is a member of the Trinity. With all the related powers, we are equipped with the one who has never known intimidation. He lives within us. Isn't that great? He exists as a resident within us for the purpose of getting us back on our feet, off our backs, out of our tents of fear, and into the faces of our giants. And we all face them. I know we did. I know we do. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I preached on I Press On. I preached on hanging tough no matter what. And I had 4 different people approach me afterwards with tears in their eyes because they were battling their own giants. So I know in this church family, there are many of us, if not all, who are battling some giants in their lives right now. So this word is for you. There are domestic giants. Some of us have had relationship breakdowns. Some of you have gone through or are going through a breakdown in relationship. It's a giant. To you, it's a giant because you've told yourself that you're less than others because of it. It's a giant. Yes, there may be failures on both sides, but it's a giant. Maybe your giant is a wayward son or daughter. It could be death. Someone's been taken away from you, and you grieve, and you find yourself wanting to withdraw from life and isolate yourself. That's what you do when you're Saul. You run away from the giant. The giant might be a sick loved one, sick either physically, mentally, emotionally, and it requires exhausting effort and labor to care for that person. That's a giant. It's not impossible. Maybe yours is a personal giant. You have a serious health issue, and things aren't getting any better. Maybe you're being forced to move from the familiar to the unfamiliar, just as Pastor Rudy talked about last week at Vision Sunday. Some of you are facing that very thing, or you know others who are facing that thing. They love where they live, they love where they work, they love what they're doing, but they sense that God is moving them on. So they're facing uncertainty and unknowns. That's like a giant. Or maybe you've gotten yourself into a mess and the complications are building. You don't know how you're going to get out of it. Or maybe you're facing someone who's looking to destroy you. Could it be that you've got depression, anxiety, loneliness? All giants. Some of you might be aging. I'll talk about the A word. And it's starting to bother you. I like what Dr. James Dobson says about this A word. You know, he talks about aging and says, it all happens too quickly. About the time your face clears up, your mind gets fuzzy. Happens quickly. We don't expect it. The aches, the joints, we start having problems. Yeah, but everyone ages though. You know, some more than others. But that can be a giant, the fear from aging. We got to face it. It's no accident. God knows exactly what he's doing in your life. You know, you're no surprise to him anymore that Goliath was, you know, a surprise lumbering along, you know, the other side of the Valley of Elah, you know. So you're aging. Welcome to the club, you know. Who's not aging? We're all aging here. You know, who wrote the book that says that you got to hang it up at 64, 59, 81, 92? Some of us think that we're too old to be ministering for God. Well, you're not. There's no retirement from the kingdom work in the Bible. There is none. And so some are living intimidated by the giant. Then there are economic giants. We all face them. Spending more than we have, making bad decisions with our money. You could be under the giant of discouragement and blame yourself from here because you've made some bad decisions, because your business has failed, made a bad investment. And I'm sure if you talk to people who are successful, they'll tell you all of their failures, you know, all of the failures that they had to go through to be successful. But it can be a giant. How about a spiritual giant? Doubt. Unbelief. You know, unbelief says, until I get every single question answered, I'm not going to commit myself fully to Jesus. I'm not going to commit myself fully to his ministry. You know, you need to leave your unanswered questions at the cross. I've told you before, because I've talked about doubt in one of my sermons before. I have a number of questions. But I don't focus on them. Because you know what? I'd rather live by faith. I'd rather live in the light of faith and let God handle the things I can't answer than run the risk that I may be risking eternity or something of the eternal for the sake of my pride. And I'll call the worship team back up. As we go back to David, though, how did he do it? One, David remembered how God had strengthened him in days and years past. He had a lot of lion, bear, and wolf stories. You know, don't forget those stories. Every one of us has a story or stories of God's faithfulness, of God's goodness, of where he's rescued you, where he's given you strength. And so I say, call to mind those things God has done in your life and the life of your family. See, David remembered the God of yesterday. He said, you know what? I've wrestled against a lion and a bear and a wolf pack. It gave him strength for the God of today. And the second is his theology was right. It helped him with his perspective. When he went on to face the giant while going across the valley of Elah, he said, "The battle is the Lord's battle. I'm not doing this on my own. He's with me." So I want to continue to encourage each and every one of you this year as we let God arise to develop a God-centered theology and perspective. See, King Saul and all the other men were back in the tent across the valley. They were staring in disbelief. They were fearful. And David, he's out there on the field. I bet he was having the time of his life taking on Goliath in the strength of the Almighty. See, when your theology is good, your perspective is clear. 2020 vision for 2020. When your theology is wrong, your perspective is fuzzy. You start doubting. You're running scared. You're holding back. You're not growing into the person that God created you to be. And this is what this story is about. This is what this story is about. That we can, with God's help, face our giants. And because we don't know the future, I don't know the future, you don't know the future, it's safe for me to say that there's giants ahead of you and me. Some of which you can't even guess or know. They're coming. And we don't know what they are. It reminds me of this illustration, which I think I've shared before, but of a very successful, resourceful man who opened up a small general store, like a sari-sari store in the neighborhood. He sold, groceries, some hardware, some small goods. And as time passed, there was urban redevelopment, and the town grew into a city, more of a city, a bigger town. And before long, the big companies, they were coming along, knocking on his door, and they said, "You know what, we'd like to buy your property, your shop, so that they can build some gigantic stores." Well, the man said, "You know what, I'm not going to sell." He said, "You're not buying my store." But they said, "Well, we're going to build a huge supermarket right next to it." And that's what they did. And the bulldozers, they came in, they cleared the land, and they built this massive grocery store, which sold all the same items that this man did, but for much less. And wouldn't you know it, that on the next side to him as well, they did exactly the same. Bulldozed it. They built another store like a Kmart. So here he is, two gigantic stores. He's a small store in the middle. He's in the middle of these two towering giants. What did he do? He could have given up. He could have said, "You know what? I'm going to throw in the towel." Feel sorry for himself. No, what did he do? He pulled up his resources and he went to the best sign shop in the city. And he had them build him a large neon sign. It had 3 words, and he was going to put it just above the door of his store. 3 words right in the middle. The 3 words were, "Main entrance here." What are you going to do with the giants around you? What are they going to remember you by? What are they going to remember you by? "Oh, she just gave up. He was intimidated. It was too much for them. He didn't realize God was at work to reshape his life, to reframe his thinking, to give him a future." Well, the choice is yours. Will you press on? Will you hang tough? Will you face your giants? Will you walk by faith? Will you step into battle in the strength of the Lord? Will you watch God arise in your situation? Will you ignore the majority who give you bad advice based on fear, based on wrong theology, that you should retreat and run away, that you should hide, that you shouldn't share of yourself and open yourself up to others, that God has nothing more for you, that you can't be victorious over your giants? Well, you know what? Don't buy it. Don't buy it. Don't go there. Because God's plan for you and for me is different from what you and I see, from what man sees. He does not see what we see. And that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. And that's where I want to lead each and every one of you today as we go across the valley of Elah and watch God kill the giants and lead us into victory. Who is with me? Who is with me? Let's get on our feet. Let's get on our feet, and we're going to sing a song, and then we're going to close in prayer.